as part of a sexual health project around the early days of the HIV/AIDS crisis. It was done as a sexual health project, and he set up a theatre group, Latex Productions. That was what the theatre company, what we called ourselves. And so we all went along to that every week, and then wrote tons of material, sketches about our lives, and then performed it at any old dive that would have us, mostly upstairs in pubs or around the country. We performed at, there was only one Pride, London Pride, for a period of time. Now you've got Pride everywhere, and good you have individual locations, but at the time. And we performed the main stage of London Pride. And it was, and like I say, all these other locations. And it was really, really significant, because this is in the time of Section 28. It's very political stuff, all, and we wrote our own sketches of different things. I wrote lots of other things about, well, a whole load of things, which sadly, the scripts got misplaced for a big chunk of time, but a person just found them again now, like to do something with them, or not in terms of performance, but like archived, to make sure they get archived, because there were tons of it. It was a probably hour-long show. Like, there was a lot of material around LGBT cultural experience at the time that similarly it ultimately gets lost from history. Well, I grew up in Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire, and Amanda was my closest friend there. Amanda was a great friend, and she was a lovely woman, and full of stories, always full of stories about this, and was manager of Gaze the Word, but also had this whole life of interesting things. She set up the lesbian discussion group at Gaze the Word, which is still going. This, I don't know, 30 years, they had an anniversary thing, maybe it's 30 years later, it's still going. So we had a really lovely rapport about so much stuff, man. And she would tell all these tales about her life and what happened to her. These stories felt like, she's telling them to me because we're mates in a drip, but I had this feeling like they need to be recorded. And it was absolutely the motivation in that I better get on with it for coming to Brighton and doing a master's in creative media. And my dissertation was to go and record Amanda telling me these stories, as you're doing with me now, to Mike, and filmed. I was doing it. I filmed her and recorded her, not that phone, on my iPhone balanced against the sofa or something like that, telling me, and I interviewed her, and asked her the questions to elicit the stories that I'm telling you bits of now, but that to have that, her experience particularly of the raid on Gaze the Word, because there's tons of information and misinformation around about all these kind of things, but like her story and the story of Gaze the Word, this is a chunk of LGBT history.
Okay, so I don't actually live in Brighton itself. I live about 6 miles outside Brighton in a village, but I regard myself as a Brighton resident for all social purposes, really, and special queer purposes. So I came there in 2011, so that's now 13 years ago, to my great surprise. I came from a long way away, up in the Welsh borders, and I came partly because I have family here, partly because I was going to university. I made a promise to myself that I'd get my PhD before I was 70, which I just did. Yeah, it was the best thing I've ever done. It opened up so much, not just, intellectual activity, but so many contacts, so much networking. It's just been fabulous. It was a gender studies PhD, and I studied, in this context, the life experiences of old women who identify as lesbian and bisexual. They had to be born before 1950, and some of them were born in the 1920s, so it was really, really interesting. And it was a very good reintroduction to university study for somebody who hadn't done any for 50 years. It sort of does all end up in Brighton, but the thing that I'm currently working on was one of its key features, and if you like, oddities, was not in the south of England. It was not in London. It was not in the south east. It came about quite by chance when an extraordinary woman called Jenny Roberts opened a women's bookshop in York. And York is pretty and historic and touristy, but it wasn't known, let's say, for its lesbian culture. Jenny's bookshop rapidly turned into a lesbian bookshop. Jenny herself is a trans lesbian. It was a hard time to open a bookshop because independent bookshops were closing down all over the land. And you have to think of ways to sell books. So she started doing reading evenings, author readings, launch events. And because she's just an entrepreneur and can't help it, they just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Till by 2003, it was a 5-day festival of lesbian arts with music, cabaret, 2-day author book festival, and all the trimmings. At the first ones, I just went along as an author because my ex-partner and I used to write fiction together. And so we went along as a novelist. And then about the time that Jenny retired and said she couldn't do the festival anymore, about the time that my relationship broke up. So I was at a bit of a loose end and I joined the committee that was going to carry the festival on after Jenny stopped. So for the last few years I was actually part of the organising committee. So it was a huge part of my life, and when I came to Brighton I started meeting women of my generation and younger. I think I know your friends, where did we, you go through that where did we meet thing. And it was always at this festival at Wyler in York. And then I started meeting younger women who had no idea what we were talking about. And just for those 10 years, it was the biggest gathering of queer women in the UK. So I just thought, well, this is my next oral history project. Better get it before we all die, because some of us have.